This is retired Pastor David, local business, easily, and a good friend.
Thank you. Always good to be a part of this great party in Pickens County. We want to just take a moment and ask God to bless our efforts today. Father, we thank you for your love, your mercy, your kindness. We thank you for the great liberties we have in this country. We thank you, Lord, for leaders like our congressman. We thank you for the leaders that represent us on a state level. We ask your blessings upon all that we do today, that you would give us guidance and direction. Put your hand upon each of us today, that we would make decisions that help benefit each of us today, Father. Bless us in Christ's wonderful name. Thank you. Amen.
Thank you, David. One other thing tonight on a personal note, I think most of you that know me know my mom's been fighting cancer for the last 6-8 months. She's winning the battle with cancer so far. The doctor's very encouraging, and we're very optimistic. So praise the Lord for that, and we're thankful for all the prayers. But today she had a mini stroke, and she was admitted to St. Francis this afternoon. So I would ask for your prayers, if you don't mind. I sure would appreciate it. I was blessed with a very good Christian praying mother. I'm going to pull a John Boehner if I don't get off that subject, but I would appreciate your prayers. Would you all stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now, Cynthia, don't sit down. Long-time dear friend, I wasn't going to say old. Cynthia Williams will sing the national anthem for us.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. Oh, John, turn me down just a little bit, please. Thank you. That was very good. I enjoyed that. Like to recognize any of our special guests here tonight. Any elected officials in the crowd, please stand. Okay, Philip, you too. I got a mouthful. Philip Bowers, thank you for coming, chairman of the Pickens County School Board. Henry Wilson, member of the Pickens County School Board. And Pickens County Senator, represents Pickens County in Columbia, Rex Rice. Good men all. Yes, he did, and Josh is running for Secretary of State. But some of the most important people in the room tonight are our veterans. Would all our veterans please stand up? Gentlemen, a heartfelt thank you. We couldn't be standing here speaking our minds the way we want to if you had not done what you've done. The last line of defense, so to speak. And we do appreciate you. And now to the first line of defense. Our first line of defense are our representatives who defend our rights in Congress. The good ones do anyway. The right to keep and bear arms is the cornerstone of our founding. The first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired by our American patriots in defense of the right to keep and bear arms in defense of liberty. The first shots of the Revolutionary War at the Battle of Lexington and Concord were fired when the British were going to confiscate the weapons or the guns of the colonists. A ragtag army of Minutemen defeated 700 British troops. And in defense of our right to keep and bear arms and winning that battle, that revolution was inspired, and it took off from there. And we have been defending our right to keep and bear arms ever since. We've been successful for 250 years. But it is constantly under siege. It's always people trying to chip away and come at it from always looking for a different angle. But we're lucky. Those of us that live in the 3rd District, our first line of defense is Jeff Duncan. And there is not a more, well, the first time I saw Jeff Duncan speak, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a Constitution. And his entire, well, I wouldn't say entire, but he's going to pull one out now. But anyway, his run for Congress was based on defending the Constitution. And he's done a fine job. So without any further ado, help me welcome Congressman Jeff Duncan.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. You want your phone? Or do you want to record it?
No, we're good.
Where's Fox, Carolina? You want this on? Yeah. It's on. Okay. All right, before I get started, I'm going to ask Mr. Dewey Williams to come forward, if you will. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you know Mr. Williams, but he's a World War II veteran. And we want to thank you for your service to our nation. He also turns a young age of 95 on October 29th. And you don't look a day over 29. I hear you. But I got something for you. Mr. Williams, I had this photo. And your service to our country and in honor of your 95th birthday. And this is just a certificate of authenticity. But you know what that stands for. In 27, getting sacrifice by you, any before or after, defend our liberties. They're kneeling and they're forgetting that flag comes draped on coffins, that it's flown in reverse on the patches on uniforms to signify that soldier's moving forward toward the danger and not away from it in retreat. The white and red stripes on this flag represent the blood and sacrifice and liberties that we have. The stars represent the 50 states that make up the United States of America. This flag's special. You fought under it for my liberties and for this great nation, but also for the globe during a time of oppression. It's a simple thing I can do to fly a flag in your honor. But I also want to say that it was flown in the honor of the men and women you served with during that tumultuous time in American and global history. So I just want to simply say thank you, God bless you, and happy birthday. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. God bless you. Yes, sir.
I would like to say, accept that flag in honor of all the people that served during World War II and all the people that have put on the uniform for this country.
Yes, sir.
There's too many of them now that don't want to do it. But I could be the water boy the next time, but I couldn't do like I did when I was 20 years old.
Well, God bless you, sir. God bless you so much. Thank you all for letting me have the opportunity to do that. That's special. I don't have a Constitution in my pocket. I had this suit clean, probably took it out, but as Rex writes, reminded me years ago, I've got an app for that. Great company. I'm going to tell you, when we were on the trail with each other, and I would pull that Constitution out. I know the guys that were running in the congressional race got tired of that, and I appreciate Rex and all you do. Every one of you that served this state, whether it's in the South Carolina Senate, the South Carolina House, in county council, school boards, city council, thank you for what you do as well. I know the sacrifice. Having served in Columbia for 8 years, I know the sacrifice that it takes to serve in public office at the local level. I want to thank the men in the hats here that have served our nation as well. Thank you all for being here. God bless you. And I noticed earlier, guys like Henry and Mr. Raines and others had stood up because they had served our nation as well. Let's give them all another round of applause. Rick, thanks for having me. Let me introduce some staff that are with me tonight. Rick Atkins. We got Jan Harmon and Elizabeth Edwards. All work from my congressional office in different capacities. Rick is a district director. Jan works for me in the lower counties as a field rep and also does my law enforcement liaison. And, of course, Elizabeth works the upper counties, Oconee, Pickens, part of Anderson and Greenville County for me as well. The congressional district I represent, just to remind you, is made up of parts of 11 counties. So I've got Oconee, Pickens, Anderson, Abbeville, Greenwood, Lawrence, McCormick, Edgefield, Saluda, part of Newberry, and part of Greenville. Oconee, Pickens, Anderson, Abbeville, Greenwood, Lawrence, McCormick, Edgefield, Saluda, part of Newberry, and part of Greenville County. 780,000 constituents that we represent. Now, to put it in perspective, I represent about a little over 11 counties, parts of Newberry, of Greenville. Trey Gowdy doesn't even represent a whole county. Trey represents part of Greenville and part of Spartanburg, and I've got 11. So you see the challenges just in drive time and just in logistics to serve the district. But I'm glad I do. It's great to be here in Pickens. I call this God country. I was telling the reporter earlier, the 3rd district is God's country. I remind folks, the north corner of the state and counties I represent, God country. I represent all an opportunity to come and experience what we have here with beautiful people, beautiful mountains, beautiful foothills, and it's great to be back home for this week. So the congressional schedule has been working. We are 3 weeks in Washington, and we get 1 week back in the district to do district work, have an opportunity to do these type things, but also speak to Rotaries on Tuesday and Wednesday, Kiwanis clubs and other things. And former congressmen weren't able to do that. The way the schedule worked under my predecessor, Gresham Barrett, he had Monday and Friday to go and work in the district and meet with his constituents and try to understand what was going on, listen to the constituents about the job he was doing. We have sometimes 5, 7, 8 days where contiguous days where we can spend in the district doing plant tours, doing meetings that are necessary, and I'm glad the schedule works out that way. But some people say, well, Congress is on recess, we're out of session. Yeah, we're not in Washington voting. But Will Rogers said the only time the taxpayer is safe is when Congress isn't in session. So as of right now, the taxpayer is safe. That means you. And we're back in the district doing that part of it. And all the members that serve understand that. The national anthem, every time I hear it sung, it just gives me goosebumps. Kevin McCarthy, who's the majority leader, wrote in a book called Young Guns when we were trying to take the majority in 2010. He wrote that if you don't get goosebumps every time you walk inside the United States Capitol, it's probably time to go home. Every once in a while, I'll text Kevin, and I'll ask him, do you still get goosebumps? And he knows exactly what I'm asking about, and he says every time. I get the same feeling. I walk in that Capitol, and I understand the immense role that I play as a member of a 435-member House of Representatives representing such a large constituency here in South Carolina. So let me tell you a little bit about what we've gotten done, what we haven't gotten done. You all know about Obamacare failure. I promised you for 7 years or longer that we would repeal Obamacare. I voted for repealing Obamacare or facets of that for over 40 times when we were in the minority. We had President Obama in the White House. We had Harry Reid in the Senate. I voted a lot to repeal Obamacare. I want to repeal Obamacare. I don't think we're doing enough to repeal Obamacare. I signed a discharge petition, which is a mechanism we can use in the United States for ship to charge duty, discharging a legislation. It takes 218 signatures to force Paul Ryan to discharge his duties, actually bring that bill to the floor. What the bill that we want to bring to the floor is a 2015 reconciliation bill that actually repealed Obamacare. So in 2015, we used a reconciliation process, which is a budget reconciliation. Just like you reconcile your bank statement and your checkbook, reconcile House and Senate versions of the budget to make them work. So we use that vehicle because it only requires 51 votes in the Senate. A reconciliation bill only requires a simple majority in the Senate because the original budget had already passed the Senate. So we're trying to reconcile that. And why do we want to use that vehicle? Because it only needs 51 votes in the Senate. 60 votes to proceed, what they call cloture, was a fancy word, but a motion to proceed to get onto the bill. So to end the filibuster, which is a modern-day filibuster, nobody's doing what Strom Thurmond did and standing on the floor, holding the floor as long as they can talk in a true filibuster fashion. Right now in the United States Senate, they can basically just object to the legislation. It's called a filibuster, and it takes 60 votes in order to proceed beyond that. Okay? Republicans only have 52 votes. 60, so we have an opportunity to overcome that filibuster or that motion to proceed. So we need to find creative ways to get the legislation passed. And so what we try to do is, do you need to turn that down? I need to hold this mic down a little bit. I can do whatever. So in order to get to a big, broad piece of legislation like that, like Obamacare repeal, and none of the Democrats want to vote for Obamacare repeal, we have to use something that only requires a simple majority, 51 votes. Now, I will say this. When Lindsey Graham stands in front of you or Tim Scott stands in front of you, the message to give them is y'all need to change your rules. They're antiquated. There's nothing in the Constitution other than the line that says each body will write their own rules to govern how they operate the House or how they operate the Senate. But nothing in the Constitution says it takes 60 votes to move to proceed on a piece of legislation. That's the Senate's own rules, and they can change the rules from one Congress to the next. They can actually change the rules in midstream. We can do it in the House. In fact, we vote to waive the rules all the time on a rule bill that we vote on. The United States Senate needs to change their rules in order to proceed, and they will throw out caveats and all that, but at the end of the day, that one rule is keeping America held back and conservative policy from being able to move forward. And I believe, and this is Jeff Duncan talking, I believe the United States Senate needs to change their rules. I hope they do. But until they do, it's going to require a 51 vote reconciliation type bill to move something like Obamacare. So we have a discharge petition that says that Speaker Ryan ought to bring the 2015 reconciliation bill to the floor for a vote. And why do I say that? First off, it repeals Obamacare. And second, it passed the House. It passed the Senate and actually made it to President Obama's desk, and he vetoed it. Well, if we're willing to send something to President Obama's desk, we should be willing to send that same piece of legislation to President Trump's desk. But the problem is President Trump would sign it, and it would become law, and Obamacare would be repealed. And I begin to think that there are elements within the United States Congress that don't want to repeal Obamacare. I can tell you, your congressman in the 3rd District of South Carolina is not one of those. I want to repeal Obamacare. I want it to die. And I want us to open up free markets and provide more choices. Because under Obamacare right now, the plan that Joshua and his family, Joshua Putnam was here earlier. Did he leave? Okay. He has small children. And the plan that he has for his children that covers pediatric care, it covers OBGYN and maternity. It also covers, mammograms and some other things as well. He has to buy that. But, Henry, you got kids. John L., y'all's children, you're gone, right? Y'all, okay. So John L. Raines has to buy the same policy covering the same things as Joshua Putnam under Obamacare because they need her to pay for the pediatric care. They need her to pay for that maternity. Even though she doesn't have kids, they're gone. They're adolescent. They're out on their own. So what we need to do is inject free market principles into the insurance marketplace so that the insurance companies are free to craft policies that meet their needs at 29 years old and to meet Joshua Putnam as a young family that has pediatric needs, or maybe me that I have children that are 22, 19, and 16. They're adolescent kids. They don't need pediatric care anymore, so we're kind of in that stage where those children won't need much. So maybe my policy, her policy is different from Joshua's policy and different from JJ's policy because single, children grown, middle-aged kids or whatever, adolescent kids, and Joshua Putnam that has little kids. The market ought to be able to write policies that meet all of our needs, and those policies ought to be priced based on the risk that that insurance company is taking for her needs or his needs or my needs. But right now, Obamacare pretty much makes us all buy very similar policies and pay for very similar things that we don't need. And if you're paying for something you don't need, the price goes up. And the whole principle was to take that money from John L. to pay for somebody else's insurance. It's a true redistribution. So I want Obamacare gone. I want the free market to create competition. Because Geico had a great slogan back. Well, they used to have the one that said 15 minutes you'll save, or 5 minutes you'll save 15% on your car insurance or whatever. They also had one that said, when companies compete, you save money. What a simple concept. Guess what? Mutt's is competing with another barbecue place, and when they compete, you save money. You get an affordable product. When insurance companies compete, you will save as they need. And you should be able to buy the same policy here in South Carolina that folks in Texas or Louisiana or Montana buy. We sell insurance across state lines because guess what? There's one provider in South Carolina right now for insurance. One. Where's the competition in one? There is no competition in singularity. And so if we had more insurance companies that could operate in the state, allowing insurance companies to sell products across state lines, because you can buy your car insurance across state lines. You can buy Progressive and Geico and Allstate and State Farm and Nationwide and all these companies that are competing for your business that operate in other states. You can buy that across state lines and life insurance and other things. Health insurance is the only marketplace you can buy the same policy they can buy in Texas. But you should be able to shop for that same policy and find a policy that works for you and your family or you as an individual that you can afford. Because my 22-year-old son doesn't need a whole lot of insurance. He needs catastrophe insurance, probably major medical in case something happens. He gets in a wreck and whatnot. But he probably doesn't. He's not married. Doesn't have any kids. He probably doesn't need all that. And he definitely doesn't need, maternity coverage, and he doesn't need mammogram coverage and that sort of thing. So we need to let insurance companies compete for your business. We need to allow more competition by injecting across state line sales. And the one thing I'll applaud President Trump for, because it's something that I've been talking about for a very, very long time, is allow associational health care plans. To allow associations to create a group, because insurance is sold individually or you're part of a group. And when I was in the state legislature in 2010, there were about 18,000 state employees in South Carolina. And we had Blue Cross Blue Shield, and we had a state employee, Blue Cross Blue Shield state employee plan. It was affordable, and it was pretty doggone good insurance. Because they spread that risk out over 18,000 state employees. Well, guess what? At the same period in time in 2010, in South Carolina, there were 18,000 members of the South Carolina Realtors Association. So you had an association that had a comparable size number of realtors. If they could have offered a group or associational plan, then those realtors would have had access to a group plan that spread the risk and kept prices down. That's why associational health care plans are talked about by Paul Ryan in the past, not recent memory, but when he went to the White House with Obama in 2008, 2009, 2010, when they were talking about Obamacare, bless you again, he talked about associational health care plans. I don't know where he got off track on that, but President Trump hadn't. President Trump has now re-injected associational plans as a free market mechanism that will help you save money by giving you an option or an opportunity to be part of a group. If you're a small business owner or you're an individual or whatnot, to be part of a group, spread that risk, keep prices down, give you the choices you want, and make it affordable. Because the whole Obamacare debate was not about health care, ladies and gentlemen. We had the best health care system in the world. We had people coming to the United States for treatment. It was about insurance. It was really about who pays for who or whom. Which is it? Who pays for whom or whom? Okay? So it's time to reinject free market principles in this. That's what we're fighting for. And I hope we get back on it. I hope it's not dead. It's going to be a challenge with not having another reconciliation vehicle for a while to get 51 votes in the Senate. But we are going to use a reconciliation vehicle, I believe, on tax reform. So let me back up just a minute because I want to talk more about tax reform in just a second. But let me just tell you that consumer confidence in the United States, based on recent polling, is at a 16-year high. Now think about that. We have consumer confidence in America is at a 16-year high. And guess what? Unemployment rate is at a 16-year low. We've created over 1 million jobs since January. The stock market, if you happen to watch it, is higher than it's ever been. Historic highs. I don't know what it closed at today. I'm talking about in general. It is reaching heights because there is so much consumer confidence out there. There's consumer confidence that Congress is going to get something right. There's consumer confidence in the President of the United States who actually understands business. There's consumer confidence and business confidence out there because the United States Congress has rolled back a lot of the regulations that tied up small businesses and required them to spend money and time just complying with the red tape regulations under Obama. I'll give you an example. There's a thing called the Federal Register. Okay, it's where all regulations are posted. So we have a regulation. Today, there's 97,110 pages of regulations in the Federal Register. 18,000 pages have been added since 2008. 18,000 pages have been added under President Obama. Now, what's Congress done about it? And why do we have all this consumer confidence that Jeff's talking about? Well, one thing Congress did starting in January is we used a thing called the Congressional Review Act. And we started rolling back a lot of the Obama-era regulations, especially the ones he passed in the last 100 days of his administration. Under the Congressional Review Act, we can do that. And I can get you a list if you're interested in what those are, but we've passed 16 out of the House. 14 have been signed into law by the President. 2 are sitting over in the Senate. I believe 1 will have the opportunity to get passed and signed by the President. I'm not sure about the last one. But what those 16 CRAs or regulation and rollbacks did is they unleashed the American entrepreneurial spirit, those small business owners, the ones that want to create jobs. That's untied them from some of the red tape they were tied up with under Obamacare. Under President Obama. And some of those are like waters of the U.S., on what you can do on your farmland for stream buffers and water retention and other things. What you can do with your rainwater coming off your roof into a barrel so that you can actually be a survivalist if that's what you want to do and have fresh water. Some of those were regulated by Obama. Some of that's been rolled back. I can get you a list of that. So Congress has rolled back a lot of regulations because we told you that we would. We passed Choice Act out of the House, which rolls back a lot of the Dodd-Frank regulations that really tied up the banking industry and created a lot of big regional banks, but made it very, very difficult for the small community banks to make the loans that are necessary to make the economy rebound, because people have to have access to capital. Small businesses need access to capital. They either get to a venture capitalist family, their bank and borrow. And if the bank, all this, it's very, very difficult for that individual, small business, borrow money, then how the economy if they don't have to that capital? One thing that we're doing is unleash community banks, make sure that they don't repeat 2000. But I give you a lot of reasons why 2008 had nothing to do with access to capital, to do with who forced money to, and a lot of had prior 20%. No thing, but this act, like a lot of the ranks, which would, Obama take over the industry, and much better is taking over the industry after healthcare, over the banking. So, sitting over, we passed that piece of legislation, and a couple other things. This was Kate. These illegal aliens that have been put in jail over and over, from continuing to get out and come back to this country and have the ability to do what the guy did when he killed Kate Steinle. So Kate's law was important. It also, at the same time, same day or the same week, we passed a sanctuary cities ban, trying to stop sanctuary cities from giving sanctuary to illegals and not enforcing federal law. I mean, the federal law is on the books that it's illegal to cross into this country without a permission slip, either a visa, a citizenship document, or whatnot. And there are signs out there on the border that says it's illegal to enter. It's illegal to enter this country without a visa. So when they do enter this country illegally, they can go to these sanctuary cities, and those sanctuary cities are not allowing enforcement of federal law. So we need to end that. We're trying to end that by cutting off the money, denying any federal funds to the sanctuary cities, which is a smart thing. I talked earlier today about immigration reform and DACA. There will be a push. President Trump has already rolled back the Obama era deferred action for early childhood arrivals. Immigrant children illegal immigrant children that came with their parents into this country, they were raised in our schools and went to our hospitals and pretty much are Americanized, but they're still illegal. Their residency status is illegal. And so President Obama said, we're not going to do anything about those. We're just going to basically look the other way, and they have de facto residency. So President Trump has said, look, there's probably some merit to giving them some sort of legal status, but that's not for me to do, because President Obama used an executive order wrongly on that, and I'm not going to do that. I'm talking about President Trump. He said, I'm not going to do that. We're going to roll that back. We're going to get away from illegal, unconstitutional executive orders, but I'm going to challenge Congress to do something about the DACA children, because there are a lot of people within Washington that have a heart for these children that were brought. I don't know about you, and getting the going might end up at grandma's, well, we might end up at Disney World, or they may go down to the office and move signs and T-posts in my building, because that was what we did as a small business. We pulled together and we cleaned up. So, okay, I'll pay them no attention. So something will, the reason I tell you all this, something will happen on, I believe, on the Dreamers. And I don't know what the right answer is on that. I know how I feel, because I believe it's a slippery slope toward amnesty, and I'm against amnesty. Amnesty is a rewarding of someone for they broke a law. Doesn't matter what law it is. We're talking about immigration laws right now. You're rewarding them with something and not punishing them in any way. They have amnesty. You're wiping the slate clean. That's a simplified version. So I don't want anything to lead to amnesty. But also understand that these kids came at no fault of their own. And is it right to send somebody back to their home country that have no ties? They weren't raised Guatemalan. For example, they didn't go to Guatemalan schools. They didn't go to Guatemalan hospitals. For all intents and purposes, they're Americans. In their heart, they're Americans. So what's the right thing to do? Now, there's an effort to allow these children to join the military and serve our country to earn their residency status, right? There's a big effort in Congress to do that. And on the surface, I think, well, that's penance. They're going to pay a price for it, penance, which is biblical, and then they can work their way toward reconciliation with the host nation to become a citizen. Well, the problem with that, as good on the surface as it may seem, the problem with allowing dreamer children to enter the military and serve for 4 years and earn legal residency, not citizenship, but earn any sort of legal residency, the problem with that is there are American boys and girls that want to serve our nation in the military. But Congress only funds so many slots, okay? So if there's only, and I'm going to use round numbers here, let's just say that there's only 1 million slots in the Navy, Air Force, Army, Marines, Coast Guard, whatnot. And that's all we fund. And you have 1,100,000 American boys and girls that want to serve, then you've got more people that want to serve than you have available slots, right? So why would I take some of those available slots and give them to dreamer children in order to allow them to serve in the military and earn penance and earn their residency ahead of those American boys and girls that want to do the same thing and serve our nation in the military? So that is the quandrum, I think, is what we do for American citizens or what we do for dreamer children ahead of American citizens. So that's one of the legislation pieces that's out there. And I'm just throwing all this out there because we're going to see this debate happen between now and probably, well, Trump said 6 months, so that's probably going to be around January or February. We're going to see something happen. My fear is that you're going to see a comprehensive immigration reform effort kind of get wrapped up in the DACA issue. And so when you get into comprehensive immigration reform, that is leading toward amnesty. What do you do for the 12, 20, whatever million people that are here illegally? Well, let me just tell you, I mentioned earlier that you can't enter this country without a permission slip, a visa, right? If you're a resident of a foreign country coming into the United States, you actually go get a visa. And that visa is a student visa, F1 student visa. It could be a work visa to come work at Borg Warner or somewhere. It could be a tourist visa. But that visa has a time limit on it for most of them, and when it expires, you're supposed to leave. And when you do your tour at the Clemson University in your 4 years, your student visa expires. Your work visa has a time limit on it. And when it expires, you're supposed to exit the country or reapply for an extension. Let's say you're a student and you want to go, you finish your 4 years and you want to go to graduate school. Okay, so you got 2 more years. There's a mechanism to apply for an extension so you can continue to go to school here on your F1 student visa. Well, the problem is too many people don't do that. Because pick whatever number you want, 12 million, 20 million, I don't care. 49% of them are visa overstays. 49% are people that we gave a permission slip and invited them to come into our country, and they violated our trust. They violated the terms of the agreement, and they decided to stay. Hey, I like it. I know I'm out of status, but I'm going to stay. And now their status is illegal because their visa overstays. Almost half of whatever number you choose, almost half of the illegals in this country had a permission slip. They didn't walk across our southern border or our northern border or come across from Cuba or wherever. They had a permission slip to come into their country. We trusted them, and we gave them a permission slip, and they violated that trust. That's low for me on immigration. We need to deal with the visa days. And that's a knock on their door, because when they filled that visa form, they told the States government, I'm going to Clemson University, and I'm studying this, and yada, yada, yada. They have a picture, we have their address, we have a phone number probably have a thumbprint, all these things that we do in that interview in the consulate or in the embassy when they're granted visa to come. Let's say they want to come work at Ceramtech. They're a ceramic engineer. We give them a work visa, and it's for 5 years, and 7 years have passed. They're 2 years out of status. Well, guess what? We know they were going to Ceramtech. We know who they are, got their name, got their picture, got the thumbprint. We know they were working at Ceramtech. Why can't Immigration Customs Enforcement go knock on the door at Ceramtech? I'd like to see Jeff Duncan. He came here on a work visa, and he's out of status. Does he still work here? Yes, he's still employed. He's in the back. Can I see him? You're still employed here. we need to get you back in legal status or you need to leave. Now, let's talk to your employer. You're a valued employee, whatever. Let's extend their visa for a couple more years maybe. And this is just an idea. But you've extended their visa so they're not out of status and they're back in legal status as a foreign worker, STEM worker, and they're back in legal status as a guest worker. But they're not a citizen, but they're not illegal anymore either. So 49% of the people that are in this country illegally, we could deal with. And there are some that we just need to send back. Probably most of them. Because they violated our trust, right? But there are exceptions. Graduate school, got busy, didn't think about, thought my student visa covered that. You know, okay, you're in grad school, you're enrolled, whatever, and talking to the university, you're on the rolls, whatever. We'll extend your student visa for the end of your graduate school. But guess what? At that point in time, you will need to go home. And you will need to reapply for re-entry in the United States if you have a job or whatever and you want to come back. Your visa that we gave you and trusted you that you overstood will be invalid at that point. So ICE ought to be able to go after these visa overstays. That's 49% of the problem right there. And then we can decide what we want to do about the other illegals. And I will tell you this. Federal law is on the books that it's illegal to cross into this country without a visa, without permission from the host government, and that's the United States government. And so they're in illegal status. Now, I said earlier today in Rotary, and I'll reiterate this again, we should not do anything until several things happen on immigration reform. First off is we got to start enforcing the laws that are on the books. We don't need to write a new law if we're not going to enforce the existing laws that are on the books. The second thing is, ladies and gentlemen, we have no idea who's in our country. Let me reiterate that. We have no idea who is in our country. Because they can come across our southern border, they hadn't gone through a checkpoint, they hadn't have a visa, they can just walk in. And everybody focuses on those illegal aliens that come into our country to take jobs, to seek an employment in some fashion. Those are the ones that the media wants you to focus on, those that are trying to make a better life for them and their family, that are seeking opportunity north in America because that's where the jobs are. And those are the ones that the media wants you to focus on. But let me go back to what I said earlier. We have no idea who is in our country. What do I mean by that? Those could be elements of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Abu Sayyaf. They could be Iranian Quds Force, the elite Revolutionary Guard Quds Force folks who could have come into our country. And we have no idea because the door's off the hinges. The country's unsecure. The weak underbelly of our nation is our porous southern border. And if I was, and I'm not, but if I was somebody in ISIS or Al-Qaeda, I'd be looking at trying to get into Latin America and figure out how to work my way up through. So I could, too, walk across the border just like the drug smugglers, just like the human smugglers, the sex traffickers, and all the other elements that come across our border, in addition to those that are seeking to take jobs north. And so we have a porous southern border. I applaud President Trump for calling it a wall, but basically we need to secure our border. And that can be concrete, steel, and barbed wire, electronic surveillance, more manpower. I don't care. Right now, we're not doing enough. And I'm concerned that rogue elements have come across with nefarious goals in mind and live in our nation somewhere waiting for the appropriate time to attack us. That's the fear. You talk about things that keep you up at night. If I was General Kelly or if I was somebody at Southcom or whatever, that would be the thing that keeps me up at night, is the fact that we don't know who's in our country. I'm not saying that ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but I'm just saying that it's the weak underbelly of our nation, and if I was a smart ISIS guy, I'd be trying to do that. We already know that Syrian refugees and others have tried to come across our southern border, and they travel to Honduras, they travel to Latin America on falsified or fake passports. I can give you an example out the yazoo of examples where people have traveled to the tri-border region in South America and gotten a fake passport there and come on up into Mexico or Guatemala, Honduras, or El Salvador, or other places trying to get into this country on falsified documents. So it's real. Before we do anything on immigration reform, before we do anything on DACA, before we do it, we need to make sure that we enforce the laws on the books and secure our nation. And until we secure our nation and they can assure me that we have operational control of our border, I won't vote for anything for DACA or immigration reform, because we are a sovereign nation and we need to secure our nation. That's just the way it is. So We're going to hand out real quick, just I don't know if I have one for everybody, but y'all can look at them. It's just an example. I want to talk about tax reform real quick. That's the next thing you're going to hear about that Congress does, because we've passed most of the things. We funded government. We suspended the debt ceiling, which was wrong. We're $20 trillion in debt, and we're going to be $22 trillion in debt before you know it. When I went to Congress, when Rex and I were running, we were about $14.3 trillion under a Republican-controlled House, then a Republican-controlled House and Senate with President Obama in the White House, and then a Republican-controlled House, Senate, and White House. We continue to raise the debt ceiling and borrow money and spend money that we don't have. We just suspended the debt ceiling. We didn't just raise the debt ceiling. We didn't call the bank and say, you know I got a $10,000 credit limit and I've maxed that out. Could you give me another $1,000 so I can continue to spend and go buy some stuff? We didn't do that. That's what raising the debt ceiling does, is we raise it to another ceiling, and we hit that, we end up raising it again. We hit that, we end up raising it again. What we did is we just suspended it. So we gave them the platinum card. Government now has a card that doesn't have a spending cap on it, at least until September. They can, December. They can borrow whatever's needed. There is no cap. Now, I hope Mnuchin and them don't need to borrow any money. I hope we have tax revenues coming in to spend. But it's wrong for the nation to suspend the debt ceiling. That's what the debt ceiling cap, the debt ceiling, was all about in the first place. So, we've already funded government. We've raised the debt ceiling. We don't have anything major like that to fund government, keep it from shutting down or default. So now we can focus on what we've been talking about for over a year, and that is tax reform. And what I've given you is a postcard. This is a simplified version of how you should be able to pay your taxes. Simpler, flatter, fairer. Now, I'm a fair tax advocate, and I'm not going to get into the details of fair tax. You probably know it better than I do. But I like the fair tax because it more evenly distributes the tax burden over Americans that are utilizing the services of the government, and they pay some of the way, right? Through a consumption tax, everybody pays some tax, and they pay a little bit of their share. We're not doing that. I'm a fair tax advocate. I co-sponsor legislation, but I believe we won't get there right now. I think we'll eventually get there as a nation, but we're not there now. So what can we do? We try to get to more of a flatter, fairer, simpler tax form. This is what it should look like, just a postcard. You put a stamp on it. Here's the money earned. Here's the tax rate you charge me. Here's a couple of deductions that we like. And here's the tax I owed. Here's what you took out of my paycheck, and here's the balance. Either you send me a check or I send you a check, and we mail that in. You shouldn't have to go through all the itemization that 65% of all Americans have to go through. In this instance, 95% of all Americans will be able to pay their taxes on a postcard. That's how simple it's going to be. We should do that. So the tax rates will drop for everybody, S-Corps, C-Corps, LLPs, LLCs, individuals, large corporations, small. We're going to see all that. We're going to make sure we're competitive with the rest of the world at our corporate level, and we're going to make sure that, let me ask you a question. How many people want more money at the end of the month in their paycheck? I know I do. I know I want it. I would love to have it. That's what we're doing. By dropping taxes, that means you will have more money in your paycheck at the end of the month. What does that mean? Well, you can save it or you could spend it. And I know America. They laughed at me at Rotary today. But we're consumers, guys. We're probably going to spend the lion's share, not all of it, I hope. I hope we'll get back to some savings as a nation. But if you get more money in your paycheck, you're going to spend it. What does that mean? That means you're growing the economy because you're spending it in the economy. You're buying, hopefully, American-made goods and products and services, and you're growing the tax base. So if you have more money in your pocket, and corporations, S-Corps, C-Corps, or whatever, have more money at the end of the day, are more profitable, they have more money to reinvest and buy equipment and expand and hire, and more people are working, and with more people working, more Americans working, that's less Americans that are drawing on some government benefit. So you're doing two things. Taxes, Americans draw government benefits, a welfare subsistence, dropping it, and your revenue in the debt, and we get back in the black as a nation, hopefully start paying back some of this $20 trillion in debt. The second big component that's not on this card that we ought to talk about is repatriation of overseas earnings. So we have American companies that are operating overseas, and they're earning bukus of money overseas, and they're keeping that money overseas. It's offshore. Because if they bring it into the country right now, it's taxed at a really high rate. So we're trying to make it fair to allow that money to come back in this country. It's called repatriation. It's just a simple, fancy term for money coming back into this country from those American companies. We're going to tax it at a lower rate than it is taxed now, incentivize them to bring that money back, and that means it's a cash infusion into this nation that those companies can hopefully use to pay dividends for the investors that have been waiting far too long to get a dividend from the company, or that company can reinvest in physical plant, in equipment, in hiring, and growing the economy, because they're expecting you to spend the tax revenue that you got extra in the economy, and they want to create the widgets that you want to buy. So allow repatriation of overseas earnings is an important concept in this. Now, what we've done and what this card, and if you go to the website that's on there, what you're going to see is a framework. And I kind of liken it to a jigsaw puzzle. So when you do a jigsaw puzzle, you get all the pieces that have little square edges first. And you put all the borders around, because those are the easy ones, right? Those are ones my kids always want to do. Just do the easy ones. And then all the other pieces are in the middle, and some are turned over, and some are twisted. And you spin them around, you look at the picture, and you try to line it all up. That's where we are. We've got a framework, and now we're trying to put all the pieces together. And the last thing I'll say is one of the pieces that Jeff Duncan is trying to get in there is capital gains reduction, a capital gains tax reduction. So the simplest thing we can do if we go after capital gains, if we don't do anything else, Obamacare, I mentioned that way back at the very beginning of this. Obamacare has a 3.8% capital gains tax built into it. Why? Because they wanted to tax the wealthy that are selling capital assets to take that money to pay for the insurance for somebody else. It's more of a redistribution concept that we talked about earlier. So they have a 3.8% capital gains tax in Obamacare. If we don't do anything else, let's do away with that. We're trying to dismantle Obamacare, at least some of us are, right? So we want to dismantle Obamacare. Let's take another brick out of the wall with a 3.8% capital gains tax in Obamacare, and that's another death knell for it. And if we reduce capital gains tax, that incentivizes folks to sell those capital assets. Sell that yellow iron, the bulldozers and whatnot, to sell other equipment, to sell other real estate holdings they may have. Because what's going to happen? They're probably going to take that money and buy another piece of equipment, or buy another multiple pieces of equipment, or buy another piece of real estate. And whoever they sold that real estate, or whoever they sold that dozer to that they've already depreciated off the books, but they just sold that capital asset and they're buying another dozer, the person they sold that dozer to is probably going to start a small business to start grading and creating jobs and another revenue stream, so we're putting Americans to work. So capital gains tax reduction actually is an economic driver that incentivizes folks to create jobs and grows the economy. And I'll give you an example. I don't have my book with me, but I'll do this off the top of my head. In 1981, we dropped the capital gains tax from 28 to 20%. And what happened in 1981 is revenue. Now, this seems kind of backwards. And if you're progressive, you will say it's backwards, that you can't cut rates. If you cut tax rates, then you're cutting revenue to the government. Well, anybody that actually studies and understands, if you cut rates and incentivize Americans, you will actually increase revenue to the government because you've created economic activity. And that's exactly what happened. In 1981, they cut capital gains tax from 28 to 20%, I believe is right. And they saw the government, the federal government, saw a spike in revenue from that capital gains tax reduction. We reduced the rate, but the revenue went up 15.5%. So we did it again in 1997. We dropped it from 28 to 20%. I don't know why we keep raising it back to 28. But we dropped it from 28 to 20%. And in 1997, we saw a 17.5% revenue increase to the government. So we dropped the rates, but revenue to the government went up. Then we did it again. 2001? 2001. Yep, 2003. I was wrong. 2003. We dropped capital gains taxes under the Bush from 20 to 15%. From 20 to 15%, and revenue to the federal government went up 25.5%. Now, you can see how, dropping capital gains taxes actually gives money to spend in the economy, people to spend in the economy, people money to spend in the economy. You actually grow revenue to the government, and the empirical data shows that a tax cut actually pays for itself and then some. So I'm trying to get, if nothing else, the 3.8% Obamacare capital gains tax gone. But I would love to see us deal with capital gains tax in general and drop them back down to that 15% that George Bush did and really incentivize the economy, because I believe the empirical data shows that it'll pay for itself. So I'm hoping we can get that. It might be a bridge too far to get all of it, but at the end of the day, as Republicans, if you're not willing to take the 3.8% Obamacare capital gains tax out and dismantle Obamacare, you really didn't want to dismantle Obamacare to get-go. I think we should. So fair, simple, flatter on taxes. Go to the website. You can see what the Republicans are trying to do. It's just a framework, so it's not a complete answer. I haven't seen the language yet, and they're going to roll it out next week, I understand. Think about that. I'm a member of Congress. I want tax reform, but yet I haven't seen the actual tax reform package, the language, and they're going to roll that bill out next week. Sounds very similar to the AHCA, the American Health Care Act, that they rolled out to repeal Obamacare. I saw it when you saw it. They actually did craft it in a private room, sequestered, to keep the prying eyes of the American people and the media and all that from seeing it, but also kept me and guys like Rand Paul from being able to see it as well. And this is wrong. You know, I try to be a team player. I want to see the legislation. I want to actually see if you've done what I've asked you to do and what my constituents expect us to do, but in the language. It's something I support. After 31 years, it's time to do tax reform. 31 years ago, Jeff Duncan was playing Clemson football for Clemson University as a walk-on. 31 years ago. It's been a long time. We need tax reform. You need more money in your pocket. Businesses need more money at the end of the day. They will reinvest. The economy will grow. It's been great talking with you. I'd love to take a few questions. God bless you. May God bless America.
One quick reminder, it is October the 17th, 2017, and home county Clemson Tigers are still the national champions.
They are, absolutely. We have one right here. Go Tigers.
I just moved here 6 years from California. I got it. Okay. I know you say 49% is probably illegal aliens, but coming from there and seeing where all the help is illegal, they're not trying to get their citizenship, and until we change term limits, how are we going to do anything but sit here and applaud you and hope that all the Republicans can do something? Yep. I just, like the Dreamers, the DACA, that's money that should be going to our children or relatives that need it. So it's just so, I'm sorry. I mean, it's such a division, and I just don't see how I can help.
Right.
So how can I help?
So 49% of all the illegals are visa overstays. So I put them in a separate category. The other 51% are the ones that are working mostly in California and other places that crossed our southern border. So about 51%. 49% came with a visa and stayed illegally. Term limits is something I support. Term limits ought to apply, though. What we've seen in the past with term limits, and I'm seeing it with some of my colleagues, it's self-imposed term limits. Jim DeMint self-imposed term limit in '94 when he was elected, I believe, to 3 terms. So in 2000, he left Congress. I think the dates are right. I may be off on that a little bit. But if members self-impose term limits, that means a lot of the good ones leave Congress, and Nancy Pelosi, Barney Frank, Harry Reid, and others stay. And so they gain more power among themselves, and they end up controlling the place. If we do term limits, and I support term limit bills, they ought to be reasonable on the amount of time that you stay. And I say reasonable. I'm not a career politician. It shouldn't be that way. It ought to be reasonable, and it ought to apply to every member. So if we say that members of the House can only serve 12 years, and members of the Senate can only serve 4 terms or 3 terms, pick a number, whatever, and that's what it is, then it ought to end there and it ought to apply to everybody. But it ought to be common sense. I shouldn't say, well, I'm only going to serve 3 years or 4 years, 2 terms, because that's really not enough time to actually, I've been there, to actually get some legislation going. Because I file a bill, then we start building support for it, and then the Congress is over. And I got to file the bill again and start building more support, get the committee chairman on board. It takes a little while. The legislative process, whether you're in Columbia or California or United States Congress in Washington, it takes a little while in the legislative process because our founders wanted it to be that way. They wanted it to be a slow, methodical process, that we don't have these huge swings in laws and whatnot. So I agree with you. Term limits work, and they should for everybody, though.
Alan Quinn, I'm from Easley, and the question I've got and had for several of these meetings is the monument controversy
Yes, sir.
that we're seeing in South Carolina. I've done a lot of research with other states, and we have a very strong law, 2/3 of the Senate and the House to remove one. And I'm talking about World War II, World War I, Vietnam, Korean War, Confederate monuments, all of them. So we've got a good strong law, but right now they have it in court trying to name it unconstitutional. I hope that doesn't happen. But the federal government has a statute, 1908, for Monuments and Antiquities Act. How are these other states taking these monuments down and not violating that statute?
Yeah, so some of those monuments are state monuments, and it comes down to states' rights and the federal government. If it's a federal monument put up with federal tax dollars and honors something federal, that's probably going to have a hard time. What they're doing is going after state monuments and local communities' monuments that they put up. South Carolina has a great law, you're right, on the books to protect our monuments. But let me just, in a broader sense, tell you, I saw this coming even before Charlottesville and before the recent event. Because a gentleman from Mississippi, Benny Thompson, raised sand about in the tunnel between the Rayburn House Office Building and the United States Capitol, there used to be state flags. So there were 50 plus probably Puerto Rico. U.S. Virgin Islands don't have a flag, I don't believe. There were 50 flags in that hallway. And he was upset because the Mississippi state flag, now he's from Mississippi, okay? But the Mississippi state flag had the Stars and Bars Confederate flag in it, still does. But he was upset that that was being displayed in the United States Congress, in that hallway, right? Not in the Capitol building, but in that hallway. And he started raising some sand about it. And so the chairwoman of the House administration decided on her own, maybe with the administration committee, I'm not on that committee, I don't know, to remove all those flags. So they removed every one of the state flags, including South Carolina's. It isn't displayed in there anymore because one member of Congress didn't have the fortitude and the political influence in his own state to go back home and lobby his state legislature and his state government and the voters in Mississippi to change the flag if he so took offense to it. That's the proper role, was for Benny to go back to Mississippi and use the influence. He's been in Congress for quite a while. So he's an influential member of the congressional delegation in the state of Mississippi. He couldn't even take that influence and go back to Mississippi with an effort to try to get Mississippi to change their flag. Instead, South Carolina and Montana and Texas and all the other states are penalized because our state flag isn't flying in that hallway anymore. Now, what she chose to do is replace those flags with the quarter. So it's a big picture of the quarter that has the state and the state. Ours has South Carolina state, and it has the wren, it has the juniper and all that on it. Not juniper. Yeah, there you go. So it ought to have the Boykin Spaniel on it, but that's just my personal opinion. So you have all the state quarters in there now and not the state flags. That was the first step, first thing I saw. Then we see things like Charlottesville happen. And it was before Charlottesville with the monuments, and started in Louisiana, I think, in New Orleans. But it's a revisionist rewriting of history, I believe. And so they're starting to take down monuments. Well, now, let's just take it to this week. We had a lady who wanted to sing the national anthem on an airplane where that airplane was carrying the body of a fallen United States Navy SEAL who was killed in Nigeria. Just recently, 4 of them or 5 of them were killed. One of the bodies came back, and she knew about it. She had lost a husband in Vietnam, very patriotic woman. Wanted to sing, went around, talked to some of her colleagues in the cabin on the airplane. Look, when we get back to Atlanta, before we get off, I'd love to sing the national anthem in honor of this fallen Navy SEAL. Delta got wind of it and denied her the ability to do that. Now, if you can't sing the national anthem on U.S. soil, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem. And Delta told her that there were foreigners, other nationalities on that plane that might be offended. Wait a minute. They're on the plane. They just landed on United States soil, and they would be offended at the United States national anthem? You see where I'm coming? Guys, we can't let this happen. I don't care if they're offended or not. They're on U.S. soil. If I go to Russia and I hear the Russian national anthem, I expect to hear the Russian national anthem. You know, if I go to France and I hear the French national anthem, which I did when I was there, okay. I didn't get offended. We have got to put a stop to this. But I see it. It's just like water on a riverbank, and it's starting to cut it, and it's eroding out from under it. And that's the very foundation. Eventually that bank will fall. We've got to put a stop to this as a nation. And it's not just the guys kneeling on the football field, which they're wrong too, because I think they disrespected the flag that I so love, the flag that you defended. That's wrong as well. Regardless of their issue of protest, there are other ways of protest. And I would, and the camera's on, I'll say this. Why don't the NFL players, with all their wealth and influence, get into the inner cities and hold a press conference and spend some of their money in their own city and try to affect change instead of disrespecting my flag? You don't think that Kaepernick or any of them could go into the inner city with their celebrity status, hold a press conference, and say, I'm going to donate $500,000, pick a number, and I challenge the corporations that are major players in this city to join me, and let's affect change, and I'm going to be the spokesperson for it, and I'm going to come back every week, and I'm going to talk with the inner city youth, and we're going to make changes in this neighborhood to make sure that crime goes down and youth aren't targeted by the police, is what they think. The data don't prove that, but use their influence to affect change there versus kneeling and disrespecting our nation, because it's not just disrespecting the veterans and the military, it's respecting our founding fathers, and it's respecting me because I'm a patriotic American. And I want to hear the national anthem, and I want to see the flag flown. But now it's going to start being removed from the public schools, from the Friday night ball games. It's crazy. We got to stop it. So I think I got time for one more question, okay? Or I got time for more than one, maybe.
Bones Wilson, South Carolina. I have a question for you. You mentioned earlier that we had no documentation of any illegal immigrants in the United States. In the past 7 years or 8 years, all the illegal immigrants that were brought into this country by the United States government for somehow or another was funded. They were brought into the United States. What happened to the manifest that they were brought into the United States on? Where are those records? And how were they funded in getting them here? And how were they chosen? How were they chosen to be on the planes that they were brought in on?
Right. Talking about the refugees, right? Right. Yeah. So the issue from those countries that harbor terrorism. You know, they tried to say it was a Muslim ban. Well, if you really were going to have a Muslim ban, wouldn't you mention Saudi Arabia and Indonesia and India? India, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia all have very, very large Islamic populations. They weren't mentioned at all. So why did he pick the countries that he picked? And by the way, President Obama also identified those countries as countries that harbor terrorism when he did his little deal. So President Trump said, look, there are countries that harbor terrorists where ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and Abu Sayyaf, and some of the others, including Iran, and the Quds Force, we're going to pause bringing any refugees from those countries in until the people that I'm putting in place in the State Department and in Homeland Security can assure me, because the American people voted me in office. I'm acting like Donald Trump. American people voted me in office, and they expect me as Commander-in-Chief and the executive of this country to protect them. To protect them at the border, to protect them overseas, and protect them in their own hometown. So Donald Trump said, we're going to pause that because I want my guys, my men and women that I put in place, to tell me how we're vetting them, who we're letting in, and why we're letting them in. So I applaud him for that because I agree. Now, I've had people call me heartless for not wanting, as a Christian, for not wanting these refugees fleeing danger in civil war in Syria and other places to come into this country. Well, first off, I think we ought to create a shelter-in-place situation where we control the air skies like we did in Iraq with no-fly zones, and we shelter them in place so they can be in their home country. When that civil war is over, they can go back into their own cities and neighborhoods and rebuild their own country instead of coming here taking the benefits that our tax dollars pay for. That's what I think we should do, but we're not doing the shelter in place. So let's make sure that the refugees we do bring into this country are who they say they are and are properly vetted. Because as a Christian and as your representative, I owe it to you to make sure that the people we bring to Easley, South Carolina and put in your neighborhood to go to your schools and shop with you at the Walmart are who they say they are and don't want to do nefarious harm to you. I owe that to you to make sure that we're doing things right as a nation. Now, who funded it? You funded it. You funded the air flight that brought the refugees in, and you're funding them today as they resettle in our country as refugees, and they have access to government benefits paid for by taxpayer dollars. So to answer your question, we paid for it as taxpayers. Now, we could have a debate about what's right and wrong with refugees in general, because I do have a heart for the refugees. I've been to a refugee camp in Jordan. I've seen the conditions. These are people that fled. These aren't just the low workers. These are doctors, lawyers, businessmen, merchantmen, and all that are in these refugee camps living in tents. Now, if we're not going to shelter them in place and protect them, then maybe there are some that we can bring in to be part of this society. That's a debate we as a nation can have, but we don't get to have that debate because President Obama and others have started this refugee process, and now the world's looking at America saying, you're heartless if you don't bring the refugees in. So I say no right now. I agree with President Trump. Let's pause it.